Assalamu alaikum, kia ora, and good morning. My name is Maria Seaman Ismail, and I'm the Community Development Officer for the Islamic Women's Council of New Zealand. I'll be moderating this press conference for the organization. On behalf of IWCNZ, we thank you for your attendance and your willingness to listen to our story and to consider our evidence. Today, we will hear from three people in the following order. Frances Joy Child, the Queen's Counsel, who represented IWCNZ before the Royal Commission. Alia Densaizen, who has led the government engagement for IWCNZ, and Anjum Rahman, IWCNZ's media spokesperson and IWCNZ's executive board member. Thereafter, I will oversee the question and answer period. The bios of each, together with that of Dr. Maysoon Salama, were included in the press package provided earlier. Dr. Salama was also involved in the submission, but is unable to be here today. She is the IWCNZ's national coordinator and is among the impacted families. I now welcome Frances Joy Child, IWCNZ's counsel.
Atamarie. Good morning, everybody. As I've been introduced, I'm the counsel who acted for the Islamic Women's Council before the Royal Commission. So to do that job, I had to, I picked up the job just after the shootings and once the Royal Commission was announced. My background is that I have acted for a number of disadvantaged groups over the years, such as Child Poverty Action Group, disabled persons, beneficiaries against the government. So I have had experience in dealings with the government and in their whole approach to human rights and to creating an inclusive New Zealand society. So I took up the brief and I went down and had a one-day meeting with the women first of all, and the first thing that struck me was their enormous tenacity. I couldn't believe they went through the story of all their engagement with government, and it was mind-blowing. There were about 4 or 5 different central government agencies that they were lobbying at the time, and the time really started after ISIS became powerful in 2014. They then, Islamic women immediately in New Zealand got the backlash of that, because they were suddenly the face of Islam. They were responsible for every terrorist attack that happened anywhere in the world. And so then I went through thousands of documents of engagement with the government that had happened. And so once again it was reinforced that here we had a group of very intelligent, competent, tenacious women with enormous experience in the issues that needed to be addressed by the government. Because in 2015, the United Nations had developed a plan of action to counter violent extremism. So New Zealand was, as part of the United Nations, we've signed up to these things. We had obligations and we had a roadmap of what to do. And these women were following this roadmap. They themselves had spoken at overseas conferences, had been approached numerous times, were a resource within themselves. The documentation also showed the temperature rising, and this was something that wasn't evident to me at all, the extent of the temperature rising on Islamophobia and hate speech, hate actions against these people. And women, as the visible face of Islam, were getting it more than ever. And I remember one Anjum saying to me at the first meeting, look, put it this way, there wouldn't be a Muslim woman in New Zealand who wears the hijab who wouldn't have had some type of negative response in a public place. So we have then what did the documents show? Well, having read them all, it took me several days, I just felt sickened, absolutely sickened, because they were faced again and again with a public service that was inept and ineffective and at best disinterested. Now, it wasn't as though these women just were dealing with people at a low level, a local level. They went right to the top of a number of government departments, reporting their grave concerns for the Muslim community and for the safety of New Zealand. And I'm particularly critical of the Secret Service, of course, because these women told Rebecca Kittredge herself, spoke to the minister and brought both of them, the Minister for Security Services, not only brought them to their annual conferences and had them speak, but spoke to them privately, told them what was going on. And yet we still see in a speech of Rebecca Kittredge around that time, she's talking about the terrorist threat from Muslims. There's no one turning and looking the other way. Minister Finlayson, who didn't think it was a problem in New Zealand, despite Ms Danzizen talking about having outright hate behaviour in her very neighbourhood, flags and calls and things like that. Then there were the State Services Commissioner, who they went to in desperation after trying for a long time to get a national strategy across the government departments to support Muslim initiatives, all the blueprint matters that were there that one has to do if one wants to create social cohesion in a society and eliminate violent extremism. None of those steps were being taken. So, after a lot of lobbying and pushing on the 15th of March 2017, there was a meeting of all the senior civil servants, and they were presented to by a whole series of Muslim leaders, male and female, on what the issues were. The government wouldn't let these people, wouldn't let the Muslims have any further involvement. Okay, you've told us, we'll deal with it. What happened? Absolutely nothing. There were a few meetings, and then they decided that they didn't need to do anything else. So, to me, the call that we're making to all of New Zealanders after this terrible episode in our lives is that you have to change the public service. It has become such a one electoral season organisation that solely focuses pleasing the minister, pleasing the government. The public sector has to be a solid body with solid expertise that moves and acts on its own regardless of who's in power. And this is just a classic example of a public service that has gone so wrong that it needs radical and drastic reformation. So that's just an overview. You can see there are many, many instances of what I've said in the report of the failures themselves. But just concluding with the point that, if there hadn't been so many repeated public service delivery failures in government dealings and responsibilities towards the Muslim community in Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's likely that but for those failures, and particularly of the security service and the police, the horrific events of March 15 might not have happened. And if the effective public service delivery had occurred and the requested structures and support systems put in place, the country would likely have been in a far better position to prevent or limit the destruction caused by the shooter. Thank you.
Thank you, Frances. Now I would like to invite Alia Danzizen to address the evidence.
Kia tote rangi Marie, assalamu alaikum, may peace be upon you and upon the world. The attack on the mosque in Christchurch was not just an attack on the Muslim community, nor was it an attack just on the city of Christchurch, but it was an attack on all of New Zealand and our way of life. Anyone who says differently does not understand the concept of community and does not understand the concept of nationhood. Those who lost their lives on March 15th were New Zealand's mothers, New Zealand's fathers, New Zealand's sons, and New Zealand's daughters, and New Zealand's guests. Thus, we ask all of New Zealanders to read our submission to fully understand our experience. The Islamic Women's Council's efforts with government engagement started with a group of female leaders who saw and felt the discrimination and harassment that our youth and women were facing. As the matriarchs and mothers, we set out to protect our community and to build and fortify our young. As part of this work, we reached out to the New Zealand government and its public service for help. The evidence I discussed today crossed the past government and the current government and there were failings under both. Much of the evidence focused on the actions and inactions of the public service and the authorities responsible for serving and protecting us. It is our opinion that the attack was preventable, and that had our warnings been heeded, there would have been support on the steps of the mosque on March 15th. The evidence confirms the following. We repeatedly warned the government all the way up to ministers about our fears for our safety on numerous occasions. We expressed the urgent need of those concerns and that we needed support. We told them that members of the Muslim community, in particular women and children, were regularly harassed in public and in our own schools. The global events and media perceptions were othering our community in Aotearoa. Our own Prime Minister at that time, John Key, further reinforced this othering by asserting that jihadi brides were leaving from New Zealand. Female Muslims were immediately harassed thereafter, as all of New Zealand should now know that was actually not true. As the world focused on us and New Zealand has spent millions and millions of dollars to counter terrorism. We at that time were seeking a national strategy to prevent the othering and to support our community that was the target of that funding. Experience and our evidence confirms we wanted the government to front-end their focus rather than just back-end on people who were radicalized. But there was no appetite. In fact, the public service was uninterested in solving the problem. It appeared that they were developing an industry that was created to maintain their own jobs. They seemed not to be wanting to solve the matters, but rather to prolong them. We knocked on every door, we offered solutions, and were basically dismissed. As examples, in meetings arranged to hear our concerns, there are no minutes in several of them. And in one case, where I spoke for nearly 1/3 of the meeting, the minutes do not even reflect that I spoke. In that, I raised my concerns about Islamophobia. Handwritten notes of those meetings have been apparently destroyed. By March 17th, we laid out everything across in all government heads of government meeting, and we were again dismissed. We informed them that there was evidence of the presence of white supremacy and possible movements in New Zealand that needed to be addressed. We warned about dangers of social media and that it was out of control and that social media companies were not adequately monitoring their product or services and had no interest in doing so. We specifically raised that lack of monitoring was hurting New Zealand's brand as a welcoming and open community. Again, they ignored our concerns and seemed more focused on their jobs rather than helping our community address the hate. So when I received a threat on Facebook in February of 2019, everything was in place to ignore us again, and that appears to be exactly what happened. I can confirm I received a threat via Facebook February 20th, 2019. The threat identified March 15th, 2019 as the date of the threat. The threat said that the person intended to burn a Quran in front of the mosque in Hamilton. It also made reference to inappropriate treatment of women. The Facebook's user's location, though, was Christchurch. I reported it to the police the next day. I signed a statement to that effect on March 14th. A police officer came to my work and had me sign a statement. At that time, I sought reassurances again because I was informed that the person who was a concern of the threat was located in Hamilton. And I sought reassurances if the person was located in Christchurch. Since the attack, on March 15th. I've been told that there is no connection. However, the person who told me that and reassured me that there would be patrols in front of the Hamilton Mosque on March 15th has said that while there is no connection, even if there was, I would not be able to confirm that to you or tell you. Again, all my information on confirmation that there's no connection is that that there is no connection. It has all been verbal. It has never been written. I do not know how or why the person who sent the threats chose the date of March 15th, 2019. But I know he did not just use the date with one person. There were also threats to another person in our community, and there was another posting on another Facebook page. We believe, knowing that there were actual terrorism training occurring in Christchurch on that day, we believe that had our concerns been taken seriously, there would have been a national system that would have warned communities and would have warned the police around the nation, and there would have been extra patrols and likely people on the steps of our mosque on March 15th, and in a position to prevent the attacks. We had hoped that the trial of the shooter would open up some of this information for us. But now we must rely on the Royal Commission to inform us. But again, because it has been a closed proceeding, where no Muslims have been able to see the evidence, where we cannot view or question the authorities, we cannot guarantee that the information will be fully vetted or that all the information will come out. Thus, it is of utmost importance that the report of the Royal Commission be made public, and that if there remain questions at that time, that there be an additional more open investigation where we're able to question. What you have heard today is a small part of the evidence that we presented to the Royal Commission. We ask that all New Zealanders read our submission and work to ensure that what happened to us and our community doesn't happen again in New Zealand. Thank you.
Thank you, Alia. I now please welcome Anjum Rahman to discuss the IWCNZ's recommendations.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Tēnā koutou katoa. I would like to begin by acknowledging the mana whenua of this land. In terms of our recommendations, the first one is, as Francis had mentioned, that we need the service to be put back into the public service with a human rights approach to policy. The purpose of the public service should not be to serve governments. It should be to serve the public. And that means serving the public as a whole and serving all sectors of the public. We need a whole of government approach. Competition between departments has been destructive, as has been that ability to pass things on between departments so that no one is taking responsibility. We are asking for a revision of the Code of Ethics for public servants, particularly in dealing with conflicts of interest and restraint of trade. We are asking that the focus should be on prevention of violent extremism and not countering violent extremism. Prevention means empowering communities, fostering belonging, valuing and celebrating difference. If you're going to surveil a community, then you should be engaging with that community and working with them to solve the problem. Hiring someone from a minority community is not a proxy for co-design. Research shows that civil society must be involved for preventing violent extremism programs to be successful, and even for countering violent extremism programs to be successful. We gave the government 3 options in March 2017. We said you could either do things for us, or you could do things with us, or you could empower us to do things for ourselves. And until the public service is ready to move to that third space, we cannot have successful programs to prevent violent extremism. We must be involved in the design, the implementation, and the evaluation of such programs. Moreover, the involvement of women in all of those phases has been shown to be crucial to success. Prevention is not manipulation. Communities deserve to be treated with respect, with integrity, with transparency, and not as targets of your activities, nor as a suspect community. Our submission made glaringly obvious the lack of cultural competence and the lack of lived experience in the room. This meant that those public servants did not understand the reality or the urgency, nor were they prepared to take our lived experience, our engagement with the women in our community, and our understanding of the issues that they had asked us for help with as evidence. This was shown by the decision to focus their social cohesion program on the Muslim community in Hamilton, rather than an overall strategy that addressed extreme Islamophobia and the marginalisation of our whole community, especially women. We are asking that there be an independent ethics board for security services. Right now, we have the Inspector General of Intelligence, we have the Ombudsman, we have the IPCC. What we need is a board that covers all parts of the national security system, including the SIS, the police, the GCSB, the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet, and any other government departments working in this space. We know that there was over-surveillance of the Muslim community. We know that 3 young Muslim men were arrested and charged and convicted and imprisoned in New Zealand as a result of sharing an ISIS video. It is understood that no person sharing white supremacist videos or inciting white supremacist actions against Muslims in New Zealand were even under surveillance prior to the attacks. We know that young men in New Zealand had lost their passports. We know that our intelligence services have the capacity and the capability to surveil. There was an over-reliance on Five Eyes. New Zealand is a world leader in so many ways. We get so many things right. Why look overseas for policy and practices that are often clearly biased? We have spoken to gun law reform and have submitted publicly on support for proposed reforms. I would like to reiterate one part of our submission. Any gun owner making threats online or offline of harm, direct or indirect, should be penalised. What we have seen from mass killers overseas is that they leave a trail of evidence. A disturbing number of them have committed violence against intimate partners. Many have an online history of threats or abuse. Members of the public should have the ability to report death threats, rape threats, or other threats of harm, whether to individuals, groups, or communities. Those reports should be checked against the firearms registry and licences revoked. If it's illegal to say offline, then it's illegal online, and it must be dealt with. A genuine and legitimate firearms owner would not be making these kinds of threats. In terms of hate speech, we say that violent acts of hate are usually preceded by violent speech. We believe there needs to be greater protection for communities from expressions such as calling for killing of all Muslims or burning down of mosques, that expressions of extreme hate towards communities be treated as seriously as the same language was directed towards individuals. We need complaints processes that are transparent, that are simple to use, and have a single point of contact, rather than members of the public having to deal with multiple agencies. My final point. If citizens are required to be loyal to the state, then the state must be loyal to its citizens. This includes not sending troops to fight illegal wars. This means applying policies fairly. This means speaking out against human rights abuses, even when committed by allies. This means being honest in the telling of our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Anja. Before we move on to question and answer session, let's take a minute to move the microphone around if need be.